want to make sure people are up to date on the latest things they need to do. And remember, your friends all over the state have a really important voice on this bill. And actually, the further they are from the metro area, the more important their voice is on these bills. So make sure that all of your friends all over the state know. And without further ado, thank you for joining us, Senator Gonzales.
Right on. Thank you so much, y'all, for taking the time to just allow me to give a quick update. I'm Julie Gonzales. I represent North, West, and Downtown Denver here at the state capitol in the state Senate, and am stoked to be bringing a number of different housing policies forward this legislative session. And so, just a few introductory comments. The pandemic exacerbated crisis, and we know that crisis exacerbates inequality. And we have seen that play out, certainly as it pertains to the pandemic, but also in a number of other systems, right? So if we're talking about education, if we're talking about the economic crisis that ensued, if we are talking about certainly the racial reckoning of this past summer. It has been, 2020 was a really, really challenging year. And, for those of y'all who may recall, at the end of June, I led an effort to attempt to extend Colorado's eviction moratorium at the state level. And quite frankly, the landlord lobby is strong here inside the building. And, when we were trying to extend the moratorium through the end of December 2020, there were certainly opponents who kind of straight up laughed and said, December, this pandemic's not gonna go to December. And here we are, it's March. I think what we've learned over the past year is that thousands and thousands of Coloradans are, certainly there were families who were struggling to make ends meet prior to the pandemic, but there's also a whole new wave of folks who, for the first time in their lives, maybe are finding themselves at risk of losing their homes. And so, if I want to think about policy in 3 different buckets, I would sort of break them out into this way. One, policies that help folks who are experiencing homelessness or transitioning out of homelessness. And what sorts of policy supports do we currently provide, or how do we do that in a better way? One area of work. Thankfully, I think given the stimulus packages that we've seen move through at the federal level, and also actually just today, the state Senate, the state capitol, I would say both the House and the Senate here in Colorado, we also announced a state level stimulus that will seek to really provide some supports to folks who are navigating that crisis, right? The second area, though, the second bucket of policies is really around the landlord and tenant relationship. We've done some good work over the years, and yet Colorado is still in the bottom 10 as it pertains to renters protections. And in 2019, we passed an initial renters bill of rights, which was helpful, right? It started to make a more equal playing field. And yet, like I said earlier, the landlord lobby is strong. And so I have a policy, Senate Bill 173, which was just introduced. I'm working on this with Senator Dominic Moreno, along with Representative Yadira Caraveo and Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez. The 4 of us are working on this policy to basically do 2 things. To further level the playing field when it comes to eviction cases for non-payment of rent, and to also ban certain types of clauses in leases that oftentimes provide a financial incentive for a landlord to pursue an eviction. Another clause of that policy would be to limit when and how certain types of late fees are collected for non-payment of rent, and to also put a cap on the amount of late fees that can be collected. I just heard a story earlier this week of a tenant who has a $1,200 a month rent and then had a daily fee accumulate. And I believe she was 10 days late and had racked up $800 in fees. And so there is no cap currently in Colorado's statutes in regards to those late fees. And that's one policy in that second bucket. Another policy that I'm anticipating that we will be taking under consideration is a codification of the federal eviction moratorium, and just making sure that in this moment of crisis that we keep people housed. And then the third bucket is really around expanding the supply of permanent affordable housing. And in that vein, I'm super excited to be partnering alongside Representative Susan Lantin and Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez as well as Senator Robert Rodriguez. Did I say 1116? I meant 1117. It's the Telluride Fix, right? Which would give local governments and counties more power to establish zoning laws to build more affordable housing. It's a tool that our local governments have been really hungry for. And it actually just passed its first committee earlier today. There were attempts from some of our Republican colleagues to make amendments to the bill. And luckily we were able to get out of committee with none of those harmful amendments being added to the bill, which is like super stoked about that. And now that bill is on its way to the House floor. And I'm looking forward to carrying it through here in the Senate in just a few days. And so that's the way that I'm thinking about housing issues here at the Capitol this session. And so, you know, I will say that a lot of work has been done. And, you know, I mentioned earlier just the need that exists. And if I'll drop this in the chat in just a moment, but there is a tremendous spike in Coloradans, not just in Denver, I think especially here in Denver, but not just in Denver, who have asked for an unprecedented amount of housing and rental assistance dollars, either because they're a renter and they've lost their job due to the pandemic, or they're a landlord and their tenant is experiencing hardship, or they're a homeowner. And back in December, I, along with my colleagues, passed a bill to give $54 million in housing assistance housing assistance funds. We thought that would last us for 3 months. January, we received $44 million in requests. February, $55 million in requests. The need across this state is stark. And if we don't take action now, we certainly have the potential to face a tremendous eviction and housing crisis. And so that's the work. And I'm happy to answer questions that folks may have about the policies. And yeah, thanks y'all for everything y'all are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just before we jump into open questions, other than of course sending in letters, is there anything that we can do? Are there any times before committee that testimony would be really helpful, or particular kinds of stories you're looking for?
Certainly, it is now easier than ever to testify at the Capitol because we allow 3 different options for testimony. You can certainly, if you feel comfortable, you could certainly come down to the Capitol and testify in person. I still, wear a mask, and it's kind of terrifying to me. So very few people are actually making their way down to the Capitol. But that's cool because we allow remote testimony via WebEx, which is a Zoom. It's one of these other platforms that is less user-friendly than Zoom, but it's workable nevertheless. And then you can also submit written testimony and have your remarks become part of the official record. What I will say is that in these times where it's harder to do engagement, it's harder to do, say, town halls, it's harder, everything's remote right now. And so for that reason, I think, quite honestly, just picking up the phone and reaching out to your legislator or sending them an email and just asking them for their thoughts, I think it goes a long way. Because so much of our traditional means of outreach are just are not working. I know that YIMBY can turn out too, so.
Yeah, we're gonna have to turn out a lot of people for this, and especially get your Jeffco friends to write in.
Yep.
We all
exactly.
have Jeffco friends. We all need them to write in. I'm not even kidding. That's a really important lobby. They hear from a lot of folks. They just need, it's just like at city council, people just need the permission structure to do the right thing. And then also, I think definitely on Telluride repeal, our conversations with, the business community and folks are really important as well. Letting them know that this can be a win. We can really, really help move these policies, and they're going to have a huge impact. And remember, this is all part of our path. Once we can get these done, then we can really move forward with major land use reform. So that's the whole dream. Does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, what are the chances of this passing? Is it we're shooting to get a bunch of noise this time around so it can get back into session next time around, or is this really good chances and we should really be fighting for every inch we can get?
I think this is the year. I think that my colleagues understand in a new way the importance of taking action, and also the potential harm of doing nothing. I think that Denver has certainly been really strong in its advocacy and support, but I think other jurisdictions across the state are starting to say, wait a second, we had this year people who were making choices between literally making rent and buying food, buying life-saving prescriptions that they needed. This crisis brought to light the need for affordable housing in the midst of a global pandemic, but also in so many other realms. I would say that we also learned that access to housing, affordable housing, has so many other ripple effects in terms of educational outcomes, in terms of health outcomes. We saw that, people who had stable housing were less likely to get sick, or who were to have better health outcomes as it pertained to COVID. And certainly better educational outcomes. It's really hard to do remote learning if you're living in your car. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, so there's that. I'm also just looking to pull up a polling memo, because what is really interesting is under the dome here inside the building, things that may seem like incredibly contentious, when you poll actual everyday Coloradans, this is like common sense policy. And so we actually did a poll, Strategies 360, thanks to a couple of dope organizations, 9 to 5 Colorado, United for a New Economy, and the State Innovation Exchange. Supported, let me see here. I'm gonna have to like go into the actual poll thing to get the clear number, but it was something along the lines of like 2/3 support the inclusionary zoning measures. 75% believe Colorado should prohibit evictions during the pandemic. 66% say that renters need more due process protections when it comes to going to court. I mean, it's just like widespread, like total clear mandate for us to implement these policies. It's popular out in the real world. It's just really contentious when you get into the four walls of the Colorado State Capitol.
Are there attempts on the right to kind of frame it as a, as something that it's not, right? Because this is Telluride repeal, in the sense of that it'll give cities new tools, but it can be framed in a very like anti, free market kind of way. Is that something that's happening?
Not that I've heard of yet. It's always a good flag and something to be mindful of. I haven't had the full opportunity to debrief with my House colleagues to hear how committee went today. But, I think legislators have heard so many of their local partners in their city councils or the county commissioners who are saying like, no, for real, like give us tools. And Colorado, I think, is uniquely unaffordable. And so it more in need of exactly the inclusionary zoning types of tools that our bill would offer.
I have a question about the inclusionary zoning enabling. Is there like a cap on what percentages the cities can ask for, or like something above a certain cap? Because in California, cities could do anything. And then a couple of years ago, the state said, okay, if you want to do more than 15%, then you have to get it approved by the state, because rich jurisdictions were like, ooh, let's require 35%. And then it looks like they've done something, but then nothing was getting built.
Certainly it is. The language does not, it gives the local municipality the ability to set what their requirement would be. And so if Denver wanted to do a 15%, or if say Adams County wanted to do 10%, they would have that ability to make those determinations.
Yeah, the 10-15% level is like very achievable. But then once they get above 25%, it really is like ugly in both ways. Because one, it prevents anything from being built, but it also like makes the city look like they have a affordable housing policy when they don't. Like they don't have to spend any, they don't have to build anything themselves. They're just like, look at our super high IZ. But this is exciting.
Yeah, we talked about like some like feasibility type boards and stuff as well, but I think it's always like challenging whether that is like a best fought at like the state legislative level or like when we're implementing these policies. So it's like, because that's like, I don't know, my argument about that is the towns in Colorado that are like operating in a bad faith towards development, we're operating in a bad faith towards development before this was passed, and like this isn't like what's going to make them make bad choices or not. But I do understand, like, I mean, I'm from Boulder, and like their old city council would totally have done something like that. Like said like 99% affordable, yeah.
It was interesting because today in committee, some of the amendments that were offered didn't necessarily try to put a percentage cap, but tried to sort of do process. So you have to, so one of the amendments would have required first beforehand a qualitative analysis of housing needs, building a 20-year needs based off of that analysis, putting forward a 20-year land use plan, and then requiring all of these different, basically like trying to bury this in bureaucracy before the provisions would take hold. And thankfully, and so it's a little bit different than what you're talking about, but thankfully those amendments were defeated today.
Yeah, but those are the classic NIMBY, that plays right into the hands of the NIMBYs because they get their lawyers and they get their consultants and write letters, and once the plan is developed, then they protest the plan, and pretty soon it's 10 years and nothing has happened.
Yeah, I think this will be a good thing to talk about with Sonja too, because we can like kind of discuss like, the RHNA process and like all of the stuff that's happened in California. And again, like, I'm not sure whether like at the state legislature is where those amendments come in, but this bill is like going to be such a critical component of us being able to engineer a land use reform that acknowledges that we like made some neighborhoods really vulnerable to displacement. And like, cause that's really what this is about, in a lot of ways, because it's not just like that 10% overall number that we can do. Like, this is what unlocks granular policy choices for us as a community to like really acknowledge the past in our land use reform. So, again, like, we don't want to tie it up too much, but I'm going to be talking with Mr. Feinstein tomorrow. So we'll see how that conversation goes.
I wish y'all well.
Yeah.
Is the CHAP group providing any assistance? The Colorado Housing Affordability Project, which started maybe like middle of last year, I think.
That I'm not familiar with the organization,
Okay.
and since the bill's currently in the House, I'll certainly check in with my House co-prime sponsors and see about that. But I'd love to welcome them into the work, because like, y'all, there's a lot of work to do.
Well, and they could make like really good model policy for like local communities as well. Like, they'd be really good at weighing in on that, because it's not really a group. It's just kind of like a couple of thought leaders who are
Right.
working on like a potential statewide housing reform bill. And so
Nice.
like, yeah, their problem is it's like they have to watch out on their meetings to make sure they don't get a quorum of Denver Planning Board. But no, so that's pretty good stuff. But yeah, so are there any important dates that you think we should keep an eye on right now, or are there any legislators that we should like particularly focus on getting support to?
For House Bill 1117, like I said, it just passed out of its first committee this afternoon, literally just a couple of hours ago. And so it's going to head to the House floor in the coming days, potentially as soon as, it could, I don't know that it would go as soon as tomorrow. It could go Friday or Monday of next week, depending on Snowmageddon here. But you know, I think that there's a lot of energy and momentum. So definitely reach out to your House members and engage with them, right? Certainly, this isn't just a Denver issue. It's certainly a Denver issue, but it's not only a Denver issue. So like Adam said, like totally feel free to reach out to your Jeffco crew, reach out to your Adams crew, anyone in the metro area, I think needs to hear from their constituents and their supporters on this effort. The eviction court reform bill, Senate Bill 173, will be going to the State Affairs Committee, which I'm the chair of. Sometimes people think like State Affairs, oh no, but I'm the chair of that committee, so they sent it to me. And our first hearing is going to be this coming Tuesday afternoon. Committee starts at 2 p.m, and we've got like 11 bills on the calendar, and this is right smack in the middle of that. So we're probably looking at like 4 or 5. Yeah. We killed bad bills in the State Affairs Committee. We passed all of the good bills out of State Affairs Committee.
My time was from before the Democrats were in the majority, so my experience with that was a little different.
Right on. And yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious, what about Robert Rodriguez? Because he's going to be hearing a lot from NIMBYs. You know, even though we're supposedly a Democratic district, there's a lot of NIMBYism in our area. Do you have a sense for where he is on 1117?
Oh yeah, dude, he's a co-prime sponsor.
Oh, good.
He's fighting the fight.
Good. That's great. Good.
Yeah. And I think exactly to that point, he was like, no, we're not asking wild and absurd things here. We're asking for the opportunity to give our local municipalities more tools. Like, why would we not do that? So
cool.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Senator, for stopping by. Well, I posted a call to action letter that you can send to your friends. And so Action Network for the legislature actually will like send it to the correct people. So it's not gonna just like go to every legislator. So it'll go to your correct legislator and for all your friends as well. But please send that around. And it sounds like calling is effective too. But again, I know like most of us are in like Alec and Robert Rodriguez's district. So we need to kind of get our friends who are in a little bit more competitive areas to get involved.
Absolutely. And what I did is I just shared the link that you can click on to see the housing assistance requests from DOLA that I think just paint a very stark picture about how widespread the impact, the economic impact of this crisis has been across the state. And I think that it's all connected, right? And the ways in which we respond to the crisis right now will then determine what our communities look like 5, 10, 20 years from now. So thanks y'all for everything y'all are doing. I followed pretty closely the group living ordinance as it moves through council. And so like, shout out to that. I know the work is not over by any stretch of the imagination, but like the work that y'all are doing really, really matters. So thank you so much. Yeah, I'll also just drop my email and stuff in the chat in case you ever want to reach out. And thank you for creating the space.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Gonzales.
As one of your constituents, this is David Pardo, I also want to thank you.
Orale. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, Thank you. Well, this is actually like a really good segue, and I think to talking with Sonja. I'm glad we kind of have a smaller group, so we can have a little bit more of like a free-flowing discussion, not be too limited in. Sonja, you got kind of like a picture of where we're at right now. We just had like a major win in the city of Denver. There was like a bunch of statewide fights over occupancy caps, and we won. Nobody else did, but we did. And so now that's like sort of changed the conversation. You know, I will, in a moment of personal privilege, say I don't think there is any issue in Colorado where like there's such a divide between the legislature and people as housing. And like that polling really shows that like housing is really important to people and businesses and everyone, and not to legislators, but that's changing. And then my last little rage point, like, oh my God, every single person pushing housing legislation is either a woman of color or an LGBT woman in our state. Like, oh my goodness. Like, what? I mean, I understand they don't want to step on each other's toes, but the Latino caucus is like who's responsible for housing legislation in our capital. So I just,
Amazing.
in the emotional labor part, I just think that's really interesting that like they're the ones who have to like carry all these bills. And that Alec isn't doing it, but I guess he is speaker now. But anyways, I guess at that point, you know, for those of you who don't know Sonja, we can have like a little intro from you, and then we can kind of go into talking about, you know, your recent work holding cities accountable.
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is really exciting. I'm really excited to meet everybody. And that was extremely interesting. And it's just interesting to see what's going on in other states and like what the boundaries of the conversation are, because California is so baroque, you know, it's just like so far along, like there's so many fights that we've had. So yeah, so I live in Oakland now. I started organizing like in 2014. I lived in Oakland then too, pro-housing renters. And the thing that was unusual about what we were doing, there was two unusual things. One, we were supporting anything, any development. Like it didn't have to be low income, you know, just as long as it was housing. We were like, yes, please build this housing. And the other thing was that we were crossing municipal boundaries to do it. So even though I lived in Oakland, I mean, there's not really as much housing being proposed in Oakland as there was in San Francisco. So a lot of times we were going to San Francisco, and some of the people in the group lived in San Francisco, some didn't, you know, and a lot of times we were weighing in on housing that was like, no one who was talking was even living in that neighborhood. And so people were like, why do you even care? You know, why do you care about San Francisco? You live in Oakland, which is so ridiculous because the housing shortage crosses municipal boundaries. Like, not only within one economic region. I mean, of course, people live in Oakland and work in San Francisco, but even to the point, like I was on a panel, Ian, that took place in Austin the other day. You know, I mean, Austin is suffering, or maybe they're happy to see Californians. I don't know. I don't think so. You know, Seattle, Portland, right? Like our housing shortage, we're just like exporting it all over. So yeah, organizing people across municipal boundaries was like a new thing. And then also just being pro-housing, just being like, we're not here to be another group of amateurs trying to say that like you should have a bay window or you shouldn't, or I don't like the roof deck. Like we're just in a crisis, like let's go and do it. And so that urgency was like, it turned out to be pretty attractive. We got a lot of membership, and like now fast forward, YIMBY Action is where all the membership lives. That's like, they do endorsements, and, you know, they can do all the politics that they want. And I head up YIMBY Law. In about 2017, I believe, I found out that there was more in California, at least, that we could do than just organize to support housing developments. Also, when in certain cases, when they were turned down, like we could actually sue the city and force them to approve. And like we had been seeing that on the other side, when cities approved housing, NIMBYs would use environmental laws to try to overturn those approvals. So it was like super exciting to know that we had some legal tools also. And that's what YIMBY Law does. I mean, we sue cities. Usually we just write angry letters, or not angry letters, but, you know, firm and authoritative letters. And we don't really have to do lawsuits. We, of course, try to work in conjunction with YIMBY Action. We have overlapping boards to support, you know, what the the advocates are already doing. And we do education, and we are involved in the housing elements process. So Adam had mentioned RHNA, which stands for the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And it's interesting that associated with the IZ bill, there were people who were trying to get cities to evaluate their housing needs and make a 20-year plan. And I mean, I can see how, you know, associating that with the IZ is a way to sort of bury the proposed project. But it might not actually, independent of that, it might not be a bad idea to try to get cities to, you know, think and talk seriously about what their housing needs are and make plans to fill them. That's the process that we have here. Every 8 years, cities get a housing needs allocation from basically the state. The state will say, okay, Oakland, you have to build 20,000 units in the next 8 years. Like, where are you going to do it? You know, what's the plan for that? And it breaks it down by income level too, right? So they say you need, you know, 3,000 very low income units and 2,000 low income and 7,000 middle income, whatever, you know? So yeah, the cities have to show that they have a plan. And so, yeah, we have activists getting organized in that process.
So
That's my intro.
I have a quick
Good.
question. You know, you were talking about the planning and the long-term thing, and I'm reading a book by Chuck Marone, I think is his name. That's Strong Towns.
Okay. I'm familiar, yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, he talks about, you know, releasing the small developers and doing, you know, and pursuing incremental change, but a lot of it, you know, instead of big projects, sort of releasing all these entrepreneurs. He makes the statement that, you know, that's the way it happened. I mean, that's the way things happened in, I guess, maybe in the early 1900s.
Like literally in our neighborhoods, Greg.
Like literally in our neighborhoods, right? Buying houses from Sears and putting them up. But anyway, so I was just curious your thoughts on that. And it seems really attractive because, I mean, you can just release all that energy and take all the restrictions that stop those small developers. It could be really powerful.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that, because that's actually, you bring me back to like my early pitches for YIMBY Law, was that those, I mean, first of all, it's really the cheapest kind of housing that you can build. You know, like as soon as you have 4 stories, like you might need an elevator and like, boom, all of a sudden your costs are way up. But 1, 2, 3 stories, I mean, row houses, like what could be better than a row house? You're on either side, like it's more efficient. You don't have to heat so much. You're not losing so much heat. I actually live in a row house, although we're on the corner, so we only get half of that effect. But like being able to build just like a block of like 3-story row houses is so efficient. And a lot of times, a lot of YIMBYs, or like a lot of people that are new to housing, don't fully appreciate how actually dense that is in the scheme of things. You know, they think the only way to do dense housing is to do like a 40-story tower or something, but it really is a truly dense type of housing. And yeah, so there's 2 things, of course, I think people already sort of know that stop it. One, zoning, like in California, 70% of our residential land is zoned for single family homes only. And a lot of that like wouldn't allow you to do row houses, even though that is a, you know, technically still a single family house. Or like I was talking about at the very beginning, you know, they might have like these FAR rules, right? Where like you can only build a 1,400 square foot house on a 5,000 square foot lot. Like there's no way to get to density. Like you just can't. So it's horrible. The zone is horrible. The other thing is, even when the zoning is good, like in Berkeley, there was actually some pretty good triplex zoning. You want these people who, like our first case was a guy who had been a contractor. He was working for someone else who, you know, was building like 6 units or 3 units at a time, went out on his own. English is his second language. He was from Romania, and he went to the planning department and filled out the forms and submitted his application, and he thought that would work. And like, it didn't, you know, like, because he didn't have coffee with the city, with the planning commissioners. Like, I spoke to him. There was so much opposition to his triplex. It was so stupid. And at one point I asked him, you know, he was coming up to his city council hearing. And I was like, so what did the city councilors say? You know, did you reach out to them, blah, blah. And he was like, what? And he's right. Like, you shouldn't have to wine and dine. So his project got turned down, but we got involved. We had been involved, you know, sort of early on, sending threatening letters. So we sued the city and we won, and he built his triplex. But like, that's like the poster child poster person for why enforcing the Housing Accountability Act, which is what we do, is so important, is because like, if we really want if people say they want community development, but when you have a process that like requires a lot of like knowing people and like having coffee with the planning commissioners, then inevitably, you know, you're not going to have people doing it like from the community. You'll have people who are professionals because they are good at greasing the wheels. But yeah, that's what we want. And
I mean, I was in a meeting recently where some of the city planning staff, and I asked them, are you looking at the Portland Ordinance that was recently passed? Because for the neighborhood that Chris and I live in, which is, you know, very NIMBY, but that you could triple, maybe quadruple the density in this neighborhood and still have a fantastic neighborhood if we were to pass something like that. And unfortunately, the city staff said, yes, absolutely, that's something they're very much looking at. So, but you know, it'll be a big fight to get that passed. But then
I was just, sorry,
get out of the way and let the small developers do it and not make them jump through all these hoops.
Yeah, making clear objective standards. I was working today on it wound up being like an 8-page essay, but it was good. It's good. Because I feel like we're a little bit between two worlds in dealing with homeowners who are used to their neighborhood sort of looking and feeling a certain way, right? Because even before homeowners and NIMBYs get to the point of complaining about multifamily housing, they will already start to complain just about the prospect of like a 3,000 square foot building. You know what I mean? Like, because they, irrespective of how it's arranged or who lives in it, I mean, they just don't, you know, you hear it all the time, light and air, or just character, or just nostalgia. And there's different approaches, you know, there's definitely some YIMBYs like on the peninsula who try to negotiate, you know, they kind of validate the idea that people's anxiety and nostalgia is a public problem, you know, which is like not a given, right? Like, we all have conflicts in our lives and anxieties in difficult times, but we don't bring every single one of them to the government to ask for help. But if your stress is being caused by the fact that your neighbors are building like bigger buildings than you're used to, and that stresses you out, like if you're the right like race and class, you are able to take that to your local government and like ask them to help you and make that behavior illegal. So it's like, I don't know. So some people are sort of, they're like not challenged. They can see that that's a reasonable thing to like get the planning department involved in, and they try to like, I don't know, negotiate with it. And I don't know. I mean, I'm on the other hand, like, I'll share this thing with you once I workshop it a little more, but I'm wondering if would be helpful, or like, would it be fruitful to try to convince people that this is just not something that the planning department is going to be responsible for. You know what I mean? Like, you may feel sad, you may really think it's ugly, but like, that's really not our problem anymore. Like, you have to go see a therapist. Does that make sense? Does the question make sense?
Yeah. Well, but the other piece is people are more important than buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, people need places to live, and your desire to keep the neighborhood looking the way it is, but you're being generous, because I often think they don't care as much as they say about the neighborhood. They just care about who might move in if these other projects were allowed to get built. Some of them.
Yeah, and so awesome. Yeah, I'm actually curious to kind of go further into this, like kind of, the RENA question as we're, in this advantage where we're like kind of getting to build some of the policies that you guys have passed, watching you guys having done them. So, having gone through that, what's, what's been your experience, kind of with this RENA process and kind of just like going through, I guess, just like kind of with this background with YIMBY Law, like, because you guys have passed, worked to pass all of these laws at the Capitol to make zoning more inclusionary, and then like kind of why you need to hold people accountable, kind of just going into the background for that a little bit more.
Oh yeah, great. Okay, so a lot of times, a lot of people will just be like, oh, well, let's just change the law and people's behavior will change, which is not true at all. In fact, through all this work, what I've found is that the legislators, they wind up kind of trying to pass the same laws over and over again, which is a real signal, right? Because in whatever it is, in 2000, people will be like, oh, let's solve this problem, let's pass a law. 12 years later, everyone's forgotten that law exists and no one's following it, or they're like following it extremely imperfectly, and then they try to pass the same law again. So the reality is that law follows practice. Whatever people are like actually doing, well, one, it becomes possible to pass those laws. And then two, well, I guess these are the same things. Those laws are the ones that are legitimate. I had this epiphany when, I know this feels like a tangent, but it's actually like very important concept, because I'm telling you, man, like you've probably experienced, like so many people think that you're just going to change the law and then it'll be fine. I had this epiphany when I was looking at a chart that showed when states passed compulsory education laws. So the idea that every kid should have to go to school was kicking around in the US like since the 1700s. But it wasn't until like far into the 1800s that actually a lot of states were passing compulsory education laws. And for every single state except two, they didn't pass a compulsory education law until more than half of the kids were already going to school. And I think that's like a really good like illustration of like, you might have a good idea, but if most people aren't doing it, and even if legislators agree with you, they're not going to pass the law, because as soon as they pass it, it'll just become irrelevant and illegitimate and a reason for people to just sort of laugh at the government. So that's why it's so important for people to show up for every project, or as many as you have time for, because like showing up for those projects like shows, well, it makes the planning commissions decide a certain way, and like it just shows that the like society, the laws that we pass, like they don't make people change their behavior. They're really a way for like the majority, like the median person, to try to get the trailing people in line. You know what I mean? So that's what it is. You have to like already have a majority of cities, the majority of people kind of doing the right thing or really wanting to, before these laws can really pass. So long story longer, we do have some good laws. The best one is actually pretty old. It's from 1981. And it says something that seems like it should be obvious, which is that cities have to follow their own zoning. So if you don't have a law already that requires cities to follow their own zoning, it's very, very, very helpful. And it is something that should be easy to pass because the zoning's already there. Cities aren't going to really lobby and say, oh, we were planning on ignoring our zoning. Let's see. And then some of the other, there was another part to your question. Sorry, that was like sort of the second part to your question, I think.
I guess kind of like, yeah, like moving into, kind of some of the lawsuits over like the RENA process in general, and then like how cities have sort of reacted to this as we think about how like we're going to be passing like these Telluride repeal laws and a bevy of other laws over the next few years. And so like, kind of getting a sense of like what we're in for.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. So I'll tell you what I like. So I gave a little outline of the RENA process before. And I can tell you what I really like about the RHNA process, and I think that you can try to foment. So like I said, so the State Department of Housing and Community Development, like they make these projections of housing need. That part, I don't know. That part was sort of fraught because as you can imagine, if you have technocrats, like they might make kind of crappy and wrong and conservative projections. And that's what they were doing for a long time. But now, you know, the projections are better. We passed laws that sort of force them to make them better. Oh, that's a good point about development by right zoning. Okay. If you have that, then yeah, what I was talking about before is not as relevant. Okay, so they make these projections, and then the HCD gives the regional housing need, you know, allocation, the guess about future need. They actually give it to the regions. They don't give it directly to the cities, and that's the part that's really, really great, because one of our big problems is that even though we have like this 9-county Bay Area that's sort of all mostly one economic zone, there's like 103 cities in this 9-county Bay Area. And so they don't coordinate, right? Like every city's like, oh, I'm sure the next city over is going to build enough housing. We don't have to do it. And so like giving the regional organization, it's called ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, this like important job of parceling out the regional housing need. And that actually, ABAG also has the ability to pass ballot measures that create taxes, that create, you know, region-wide taxes. And they have a few, you know, regional programs. It's actually, you guys probably also have these regional committees because they're basically required by the federal government. Like if you want to be able to get money for transportation. Okay, yeah, there you go. Yeah, COGS, they're councils of government. Try as much as you can, if you can get decisions about land use to go to those COGS, that is great, because it really meets you in the middle, right? It allows, like, it allows you to say like, oh, it is a local process. We do have local control. Like your ideas are important, city. But it also is the right place to do it because you're making decisions at the regional level, and that's the level that your economy is at anyway. So yeah, if you're not already, like, get on those COG committees. Like I'm on one of those committees. Like there's hundreds of committees. They're actually pretty easy to get on. Every committee has vacancies. Try and get on those committees. I can see stuff I'm on my phone, so I can see stuff in the chat, but only like the first 4 or 5 words. So somebody was talking before about by right zoning, and I'm very curious about what the rest of the comment was.
Gosha?
Yeah, sure. So our zoning is, it's mostly used by right or development by right if the property is zoned for certain development density. You can just develop, like there's no discretionary political approval process. If you're zoned for 5-story mixed use, you just go through the site plan submittal process and you build 5-story mixed use development. The process is political when developer needs a rezoning, but that's really only about less than 10% of all the development that happens in the city.
Okay, well, that's awesome. Then don't listen to me. You're like light years ahead of us. We are clawing our way towards more and more by right zoning whenever we can. So that is that's the best.
We look at you guys in California and it's just like, what's going on? Like, things are a lot simpler here. But I would say, Gosha, we do have like that cultural issue, at least in Denver, where like the city council will pass plans and then not rezone the area that they we're supporting rezoning. And so like we have this big vacant area next to downtown called the Denargo Market. And like, we're now going through these rezonings that were approved in plan like a decade ago. And we're like doing them now, and they're being treated as if they're spot rezonings, even though they're like not.
Okay, we had that problem too, because this housing elements process I was telling you about, where cities have to say to the region and to the state, like, okay, this is our plan, you know, for accommodating all this housing. That housing element in that word is like chapter, you know, like part. And so the housing element, there's a land use element, which is weird. Why would you have two separate? There's transportation element. Sometimes there's like a parks element or a public safety element. You know, the general plan like encompasses all these things. So the housing element is part of the general plan, and cities were saying, okay, in our housing element, like, look, we have this new map. We're gonna, you know, upzone all these areas, and then they were required to rezone within 3 years, but then they just like didn't. They just wouldn't do it. And then so the developers were like, this isn't you told the state that you were going to do this. In exchange, they qualify for all kinds of grants and stuff. They get money for it. So they changed the law in 2017 that if your project is general plan compliant, it doesn't matter what the zoning says. So you can just build it. And that has been so awesome. You should get that.
Yeah, that
Try to get
sounds like something that would be really good. It's instead of requiring individual rezonings for something like Denargo, if the city was like, yeah, you have to fit the plan, and the plan says that that's supposed to be high density housing, which is what the, 2040 plan and every other plan that there is in the city says about Denargo. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Dimitri just brought up something that's specific to Denver, but if he wants to talk about like oh God, there's another one. But yeah, first chapter 59 is a thing that we've got here. 20% of our city is still under an older zoning code. 80% of it was rezoned in 2010. I'm sure somebody else can speak more intelligently about it than I can. But yeah, we just have this kind of messy situation that ends up gumming up the works of things like it was a reason that people fought against the group living thing fast. They were like, it's not going to apply everywhere. And it's like, whose fault is that? That's not like this piece of legislation's fault. Yeah.
I
So
think
what's
part
the
of our
20%?
challenge is that like our comprehensive plans or long-term plans have all these equity goals and inclusivity goals, and they really rely on rezonings or neighborhood plans to implement those goals. And of course, when it gets to the local level, it all gets very messy because everybody wants affordable housing, just not in their backyard. So yeah, that's a perfect example of like accessory dwelling units that they are written into a comprehensive plan to be allowed everywhere, but we still rezone them one at a time. And like areas like Reno, where the grove's supposed to go and the housing's supposed to go, it's part of the comprehensive plan, but it really requires a rezoning to break the entitlements to that level to actually deliver the housing that was written into the plans. So I think that's kind of the challenge, that the rezonings are still local, or the neighborhood plans are local, therefore they're subject to NIMBYism, whereas our comprehensive plans are kind of more, I guess, overarching and more ambitious in terms of housing goals.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious on that topic, right? The city basically said all of our plans, all of our goals say ADUs in every single family zone lot, right? Like, make it happen. And then to make that actually happen, each individual property owner has to go through, like a 4 to 6 month process, and like an application and review, and it has to literally go before city council for them to vote to rezone per something that's in the plan. And and we have like super majority rules around here, so if 20% of the land surrounding your parcel, if the owners of that land object, they can, and it's just ridiculous because you could have one guy literally say, no, I don't like this. Then that requires a supermajority vote in city council. And that's in the city charter. So that's like almost impossible to take out the supermajority. And it's like, they don't sit there and say, well, you know, like this council person is absent, so we're just going to recalculate the supermajority. No, they're just like, that's just a no. So you could, you know, and you need what, like 10 votes, 10 out of 13 or something. So there's just like this onerous process for something that the city already said is okay and should happen. Is that grounds to sue a city to say, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you putting the burden on individual landowners?
I mean, it depends. I don't, it depends if you have any good laws that can help, you know, it could be, but I don't know, but it is sort of tempting to look. Yeah, I mean, as you know, we had at the state level, they made a bunch of ADU laws, you know, to try to force cities to allow them. I have a question. Do you have a lot of illegal ADUs? Because in San Francisco, there are a lot of people that just put one in without getting permits. Or do you know? I mean, sorry again.
So I can speak to that because I live in. I wouldn't call it illegal, but it is a non-conform. I live in a 1890s Victorian home that was subdivided into 2 apartments. I love it. It's great. I have a backyard. But yeah, it's our upstairs unit in this building is a like quote unquote non-conforming unit. So I don't know that we have like straight up illegal ones. Somebody else may be able to speak better to that, but there are definitely all over the city things that have been grandfathered in because they predate modern zoning or modern building codes. Yeah.
The reason I ask is that we had a lot of just straight up illegal units, and which means tons of tenants, you know, in these illegal units. And the tenants sort of incorrectly actually got the idea that since their unit is illegal, they have fewer rights. And at least in San Francisco and I guess in California, it's really the other way around, that if your unit's illegal, your landlord has way fewer rights, and that you can even, you know, withhold rent and, you know, and just not pay, right? Because they're not even supposed to have the unit. But that aside, the fact that there were so many people living in these illegal units, again, law follows practice. It was helpful because like there was a movement to like do amnesty, you know, legalize all these illegal units. People are living there anyway. And I think it just sort of helped, you know, normalize the whole idea because it was already happening. You know, it was just hard for community members to be like, this is going to ruin our neighborhood when like on every block it was already happening. But I don't know, I guess I'm not really saying that you should just make it legal units. I'm totally not saying that here right now.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking, you know, Boulder definitely is going to have a lot of those. And, you know, like there's probably room next year for like, you know, state level legislation on ADUs. Like, I feel like that's something that could get through. You know, I know Durango has a bunch of ADUs too. So, and like all of these places are just having a way worsening housing crisis. So I think that's like a good angle to look at because like, you know, our hassle here is like we have hypothetically a supermajority of the Denver City Council favors ADUs citywide and they're not allowed citywide. And like, I don't really know how to like, you know, I think that's something we've struggled with is how to like push that over the line since they all back it.
Yeah, I mean, it's trying to just be like, it's already happening. And like the fact that it's like so many other things, like the fact there's no legal path to do it is that, you know, so people are doing it anyway and it's dangerous because they don't want to have a building inspector come in. And so they're putting in these weird illegal kitchens and like that could be an angle if it's happening, right? Or maybe even if it's not happening, it's just happening a little bit. You can always make it seem like it's happening even more. The beauty of politics. You like find 3 people to really keep writing the same letter over and over.
Yeah, what I like is like ADUs aren't necessarily detached, right? Like you could have an ADU basement.
Yes.
And then furthermore, it seems like ADUs have or had until the group living had passed less restrictions on occupation. So there was cases where like the primary residence could have, no more than 2 people, and then the ADU could have 5, and it was like a quarter of the size. But if you read the law strictly.
So yeah,
All
what
right.
is, oh, sorry, get.
Oh no, I was just kind of thinking like, looking at where we're at now, because we're like probably about 8 to 10 months out from the start of Denver's like repeal single unit zoning effort. Like what laws did you find helpful at a state level? Like what sort of work did you find helpful as like a YIMBY activist to like grow your membership? And I guess we'll start with those two, and then I'll do a question that I'm sure you really love.
Okay. We have found that the messaging around like the racist origins of single family zoning is extremely effective. I mean, that is just getting people's attention, big time. Sort of ironically, I don't know, I think in Vox, somebody did a poll that looked at different kinds of messaging, and counter to our experience, messaging about allowing more housing being good for economic growth was more compelling than the anti-racist messaging. So I guess that's not that surprising, because like most people are not anti-racist, like they're actually racist. So anyway, yeah, just use both messaging, because it was pretty 50-50. It was basically like Republicans and Democrats responded much better to the economic growth messaging, but people who said they were independents, so like Bernie voters, like responded better to the anti-racist messaging. And it's true that, when we started, like I definitely, back in SF Barf days, it was the economic growth messaging was what was working the best. But I was kind of mixing it with like it was like my personal story. I mean, it was like immigration messaging, like people are trying to move to this region to make their lives better. And so indirectly, I realized it was economic growth messaging, but it was like more from the personal point of view. Definitely like helping people know what to say. I mean, my personality, I was always sort of bad at giving talking points, because I was like, the spirit is within you, you already know, like I was like trying to give people confidence in their own judgment, which is good, but really a lot of people just want talking points. So definitely like do that, make it easy. You probably already know about that. But yeah, I definitely will share this thing with you, because like some of the early, and maybe you're all familiar with it, but like the early court cases, like really laying out like why we have zoning, are so ugly and like so indefensible. You have the justices. There was a case in New Orleans, and the justice is he's like, look, we can't allow apartment buildings and businesses in single family zones, because that would allow like strangers to have an excuse to walk around the neighborhood. And so it's much easier on the police patrolman if you don't have those kinds of things, because, then the police patrolman isn't always trying to like figure out who the stranger is and chase them out of your neighborhood. It's just hideous. The other thing is too, is like I think a lot of people think that zoning separates residential uses from like industrial uses. And they're like, that's good. I don't want to live next to a factory. But the reality is that zoning separates single family on the one hand from industrial and apartments on the other, and trying to make people have that epiphany where they're like, holy shit, like there's this huge category of residential that is totally allowed to be near some very disgusting uses, and it really doesn't have to do with separating people from harmful uses. It's separating certain kinds of people from harmful uses and from other kinds of people. And yeah, so I think that's like so good for trying to like break down this single family zoning, because like we are in a moment where if ever people were like more interested in being anti-racist, it's now. And I think that people are a little more receptive to those messages than they were before, and you know, ready to like think about how, you know, they can do something different. And then there's also like where your kid's gonna live. That's like an old classic that always works. Well, almost. But people who really don't care about housing, like if they're older and they're like 25-year-old kids are like living with them, they care a little more because they're exposed to how difficult it is. Oh, you know what else too? Oh, sorry. If you don't already have them, you need tenant protecting demolition controls. Do you have that at all?
We don't, and we're actually going to need some of those. We've got that area is coming up. That's for Federal Boulevard, folks.
Yeah, we passed some here and they're okay. They're like part of the, at the state level, part of the density bonus, and there's like an independent program. And the upshot basically is like the way we structured it is that it's on the city, of course, well, maybe not of course, but it's on the city to enforce it. Like the city can't deliver a permit, you know, for a demolition unless the tenants, if they're low income, have a right of return, and there's a you know, the new project is going to replace that housing with affordable housing. It's really, really important. It like, I mean, first of all, it's important for people's lives, but it also is important politically, right? Because like a lot of people's idea about development is that inevitably it's going to displace people. And so if you can, you know, all the stuff that you're doing on the eviction moratoriums is in the same vein, you know what I mean? Making sure that you're like prioritizing certain populations and making sure that there aren't like harmful outcomes is going to be politically and policy wise like so important. But the cities, so the cities here, I mean, I don't like people I'm sure on this call are coming at this from different places, but working on like making sure cities know about these tenant protecting demolition controls and even enforcing them has been just eye-opening. Like deeply, 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 cities do not care about tenants. Like it is so ugly. It is so ugly. So, you know, whatever, I mean, intellectually, I was like, okay, yeah, this is obviously, you know, an issue, but it is just shocking. And it's especially shocking because like from the YIMBY side, we hear so much from housing opponents about how like, oh, we don't want this market rate housing because all we care about is affordable. But when you're talking about actual tenants, it is crickets. It is like, it's so horrible. So the cities are always pretending they're like, well, how are we supposed to know who lived there? And it's just like, there are a million ways to know. You can just force the developer to tell you. I mean, the previous owner knows. They make so many excuses. So don't take their excuses.
So that's actually, that ties into something that's coming forward in the Denver City Council soon, which is the effectively a rental registry, like a long-term rental registry. And up until now, I think the reason behind that mostly had to do with like having access to data that we have not previously had in the city. But that being that, what you just brought up makes that sort of licensure and system way more valuable to us as a city, because it has an additional use in controlling what happens when it comes to demolitions, things like that.
Yeah, Berkeley has a rental registry already, so that's great. And amazingly, San Francisco doesn't have one. A lot of the proposals for rental registries are a lot more focused on the unit, right? They're really talking about like registering units. How many apartments do we have? What rents are they, you know, at? So when you guys are passing, you know, this proposed law, try to make sure that there's something in there about the tenants, because that's the other half of it, right? Like if you have 2 apartments, I mean, our tenant protecting demolition controls has a 5-year look back to try to, of course, you know, if it doesn't, then it's not going to work, right? They'll just kick the tenants out and then put in the applications three days later. Like, what's the point of that? So we have a 5-year look back. But if the only information we have is like, yes, it was rented. Like that doesn't help, like we need to be able to like write a letter to those tenants and say like you can come back if you want, and also know how much they're paying and what their income was.
Right.
So it's not super easy you can't necessarily require people to put it in, but you can at least ask for their contact info and then like tell them, that they qualify for a certain program if they want to fill out an application for it.
So it's an interesting question, because if you own a property, I get it, you can own it in a corporation or something, so you can hide your identity if you want to, but the vast majority of people, they own the home in their name. So it's all public information.
Yes.
And I would imagine developers will say, well, we can't give you our tenant list. It's private. We would be violating our tenants' privacy. But it's like, well, homeowners' information is all public, so why shouldn't tenants be public? Which if they would, would be an enormous tool for organizing.
Especially as tenants have more and more rights, like we have this controversy about buyouts. There's so much back and forth about, so in San Francisco, like certain tenants have a lot of, what am I thinking of? I can't think of the word, but they have a lot of like rights to stay there basically indefinitely, right? And so if their landlord wants them to leave, then they have to buy them out. The buyouts should be public. It's taken a long time, but tenant organizers eventually came around to the buyouts being public. But there was this kind of like hemming and hawing about like privacy, I don't know, blah, blah. But if you own a piece of property and someone buys you out, right? They give you $500,000 so that you leave and you release your claims to it so that they can own it and move in. That's 100% public. It's always been public. So like, if you have basically a use right to an apartment and somebody buys it from you, your landlord buys it from you, why would that not be public? Like it's just the same as home buyers look around like, oh, what are people paying? What's reasonable? Tenants need to know what other tenants are getting as far as buyouts so they can be in a good position to negotiate.
You're exactly right. And I'm a commercial real estate broker and on the leasing side. And so again, if it's a sale, everything is public. If it's a lease, oh my God. I just did a lease for a big law firm in Denver, national law firm, and I had to sign confidentiality agreements with both the landlord and the tenant. Both made me sign confidentiality agreements. And as a broker, that actually is what makes me valuable, is because I have access to information that isn't public. If it was all public, I could be disintermediated and I'd be out of work. But from the house, and I think the same thing on the residential side, the landlords want to hide all that information because it gives them power over their tenants. It prevents the tenants from really organizing or people contacting their tenants to organize them. So they're fight making that information public.
Yeah, this has been a really, really interesting conversation. And I guess, that kind of goes to, one topic I wanted to talk about. So as a YIMBY group, we have a lot of haters in our community. And I was just, they range from like legitimate criticisms, and things that we've worked to do better to, there's a group called Denver Fugly, which just like hates multi-unit housing and says it's all ugly. But I guess, in your experience, I know you've had to endure like a whole quiver of arrows, like, kind of what's your advice for like dealing with the haters and powering through that?
Well, so one thing is I do wish that I had known earlier that I think is sort of good for anybody that's somewhat in the public eye. It is worth learning how to think about what you say so that not only in any context will it be acceptable, but also almost any combination of any words inside of what you say will be acceptable. And it sounds kind of hard at first, but it's actually not as hard as you think. But just really starting to parse, like whether it's your tweets or your like public, whatever, just, you know, like cover up different parts of it and be like, does this still make sense? And is it still what I mean? That's very, very, very valuable. I think I'm not really the right person. There's also, and then like secondarily to that, like there's a really anxiety inducing and kind of fine line, like when you're an organizer or you're really active with a group, and then there's members of your group that are out there saying wild stuff that you don't necessarily agree with, like that can be very difficult. So I know that you've already have some guidance of that and you have like a code of conduct and stuff. But I mentioned all this stuff first because it's like, once you have all that locked down and you feel good about what you think, then that's the most like calming and nourishing and strengthening thing of all. You know, like you only like, it only really feels bad when someone attacks you if part of you, even if it's just 1% of you, part of you thinks they might be right. And that's when it feels really, really bad. And yeah, so, you know, on the one hand, just make sure that you 100% think that you're right. On the other hand, like when you do feel bad, that's actually not so terrible, right? Like if you step on a rock and it hurts, like that's your body's way of telling you to do something different. And like, feel it really, like feeling it when someone's mad at you is kind of your conscience's way of thinking through it. I also, you know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with changing your mind, deleting tweets, apologizing. People love apologies. I know that like Donald Trump had the opposite theory, but frankly, like we're not politicians. We're actually regular people. And so, yeah, if you change your mind, like you be out there apologizing, people actually love it. But yeah, I mean, mostly they're just haters. Like you have real disagreements. Like people are going to hate you. Like the things that you want that are going to make life better for you and people like you, there are people out there who feel like those things are going to make their lives worse. And at some level, like there's just nothing you can do about it. You know, like you just do your best. And sometimes there's something else going on with them. I saw this, there's like very hilarious letter to the editor that YIMBY still sort of pass around, where this guy has like this long thing where he's like, I'm constantly fighting with my wife and I'm opposed to this building across from me. And they built the building and my wife left me and we have to stop all the new development. And it's terrible to laugh at his pain, but like, you can just see what's happening, you know, like it has nothing to do with the building. So sometimes that's nothing to do with you. People just have their own struggles.
Awesome. Yeah. Does anybody else have any last questions? And then we can head out. Because I've been on Zoom for 13 hours now. And my eyes are definitely starting to bleed. This is actually, and my new job is my first remote working during the pandemic. So this is new for me, but it's still like, oh my God, I don't know how everybody's been doing that.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I don't want to cut anyone off.
I just was going to say, thanks, Sonja, for taking the time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I love meeting people, huh?
If you become a YIMBY Denver member, you can get into the YIMBY Action Slack and you can ask Sonja questions on there. So that's one of the advantages. I think we're all members, but definitely push it out to your friends who haven't joined. You know, we really want to bring on an organizer. Like I mean, you heard from Senator Gonzales, who's like one of the leaders of the state legislature, that like we're a big deal now. And so like we really need to hire an organizer and keep growing. So awesome.
It's really fun because I read about Sonja Golden Gates and learned about you, and then now here I am. It's so fun.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thanks so much for coming, everyone. I'm going to sign off, but I'll leave and I'll stop the recording, but I'll leave the room open if people want to hang out more. And soon we'll be doing in-person events. So that'll be really nice.
Cool.
All right. Good night, everybody. I'm going to go hang out with my 3-year-old.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Good night.
Bye.